In this video, we'll be discussing the settings that will affect how your soffits, fascias, and gutters will generate on your roof planes. Many of the settings we'll discuss can be found in two places. You can find them when you build the roof initially in the Automatic Build Roof tool, under Options, and under Structure. But once you've built the roof planes, you can change some of these settings in each individual roof plane. We'll go ahead and cancel out of here, and then select one of our roof planes. Go down and use our Open Object tool to open up the roof plane specification for this one roof plane. And we'll take a look at the settings under the Options panel. You'll notice here that some of these options are grayed out. That's because they can only be set when you initially build the roof planes. Here on the Options panel for this individual roof plane, we can make a selection for how the eaves are cut, plumb cut or square cut. Right now, our eaves are plumb cut, or straight up and down at the ends of the rafters. You can also select square cut. When I click OK now, you can see that the rafters will be cut off square or perpendicular to the slope of the roof plane. This may be easier to see in our cross-section elevation. We'll double-click again on that roof plane and take a look at the other options. You have an option here for boxed eaves. First, we'll go back to the plumb cut, and then we'll click on Boxed Eave. When I click OK now, you can see that Chief will build a flat soffit or a boxed-in eave. If I open up that specification dialog again, you'll notice that when I select Box Eave, it automatically selected Default to Overhang, which means that it'll only box in or soffit just from the wall to the outside of the overhang. However, we can change this. I'll go ahead and uncheck Default to Overhang and change this length to 36 inches. When I click OK now, it doesn't look like anything changed. However, if I go to the elevation view, you can see that my boxed eave is now 36 inches wide at the gable end. I'll double-click again on the roof plane. Notice that this eave, which is higher up, is not boxed in, but it is part of this entire roof plane. We do have an option here for higher eaves to be boxed. We'll click on that, change the length back to Default to Overhang, and click OK. Now you can see that both the upper and lower eaves are boxed in. You also have options here for how your ceiling break lines will appear. The ceiling break line is this black dotted line where the sloped ceiling comes up and meets the flat ceiling. I'll go ahead and click OK here, and we'll take a look again at that cross-section view. If I zoom out a little ways, you can see here that the ceiling height is set at 9 feet. Where the roof plane comes down below the ceiling height, the ceiling finish will follow the underside of the roof framing, and then at that ceiling height will flatten out. This is the ceiling break line. In that Options panel, you can determine if you want that ceiling break line to show at the finish intersection here, or at the framing intersection. You also have options for what you want to supply for your roof plane, including gutters. This is the only one you can change in an individual roof plane. The rest of the supply settings for edge flashing, ridge vent, metal drip edges, and valley flashing can only be determined when you build the roof. Under the 3D display options, when Show All Ridges is checked, a line along each hip between roof planes forming a conical roof above curved walls will be displayed in vector views. Unchecking this box will suppress these lines. Again, this only affects roofs over curved walls. So let's go ahead and uncheck boxed eaves, click OK, and then here in our cross-section view, we'll zoom out a bit and then use our Zoom Area tool and zoom in a little bit closer to our eave overhang. And then we'll double-click on the roof plane again here in the floor plan view to open up that roof specification dialog. Now let's take a look at some of the settings under the Structure panel. The Structure panel affects the framing of this roof plane. For instance, here you can automatically build the roof framing every time you make a change to the roof plane. You can also build the roof framing once by clicking on this button. Once you've built the roof framing, you can retain the roof framing even if you edit the roof plane itself. You also have a button here to trim to soffits. You'll notice here that the rafter is the full width of the rafter until it gets to the plate height of the wall that it's bearing on. Then it's trimmed down to a smaller size at the overhang. If we frame this now, the framing would fill this space exactly. With this box checked, if I click OK, I can frame this roof plane by clicking on the Build Framing for Selected Objects button in the Edit toolbar at the bottom. I don't want to show my roof rafters layer in my floor plan, so I'll click No here. You can see that the rafter itself frames down to the plate height and then is trimmed off. I'll go ahead and click Undo, and then double-click again on that roof plane and uncheck the box for Trim to Soffits. When I click OK now and frame the roof plane again, you can see that the rafter will continue in its same width all the way through the overhang. Now, of course, for this effect, we'll want to change the depth of our fascia boards and the depth of our soffit. I'll double-click again on that roof plane, and here we'll make one change at a time. I'll go to the Structure panel, and we'll change the eave subfascia to the same depth as the rafters at 9¼ inches. I'll go ahead and click OK, and you'll notice it didn't change anything. But if I open that up again and change the size of both the eave subfascia and the gable subfascia to the same size as the rafters, it'll drop that soffit right down to the bottom of the rafter. That depth is determined by the subfascia. However, where it flattens out at the bottom here is determined by the outer fascia board. So we'll double-click again on that roof plane, and we'll make a change here to the gable fascia and eave fascia. I'll make these 11¼ inches. Now our soffit follows the bottom of the rafter nicely. We'll need to reframe it to see the change in that subfascia. We'll go ahead and click Undo until we get back to our original eave overhang settings. You also have options for the framing of this roof plane for the rafter spacing and the maximum lookout spacing. You can also change the layers of the roof platform itself. You can change the finish layer, which right now is using asphalt roofing, over a layer of OSB sheathing. You can add layers. For instance, if you wanted to add a rigid insulation layer, you'd simply click on Insert to add a layer. To delete a layer, you simply click next to the layer number and delete. You can also change this roof plane's structural layer and change the depth of the rafter. I'll go ahead and cancel out of there. You also have the option to change the ceiling material under this individual roof plane. If you click on the Edit button, you can add layers and then select a different material out of the library browser. You can also change the depth or the thickness of the soffit. Right now it's at 3/8 of an inch. If I change this to 5 inches, you can see here that now that soffit material is very wide. Now we'll go ahead and discuss one last setting in that roof plane specification dialog. We'll talk about the option to flatten the soffit underneath the eave subfascia. But before we do, let's click on that button to trim the framing to the soffits to narrow down the rafter at the overhang. And then I'll make one more change for the sake of demonstration. We'll change the eave subfascia width to 2½ inches. I'll go ahead and click OK, and then frame this roof plane. And you can see here that my subfascia is nice and wide. We'll open up that roof plane again, go to the Structure panel, and then click on Flat under Eave Subfascia. You can see right now that the soffit under this eave continues past the subfascia to the fascia board. We'll click on Flat under Eave Subfascia and click OK. You can see now that the soffit will stop and flatten out right underneath our subfascia board. So by using the various different selections that Chief gives you in the Build Roof Tool dialog and under the individual roof plane specification dialog, you can determine how your soffits, fascias, and gutters will appear in your roof design.